Hi Dan, thanks for taking this call again. I must say, I think I need to buy you a coffee because you have been very nice to, listen to my questions and so forth. So in the last episode, we talked a little bit about the core principles of learning and how we need to be more aware of these principles so that we can design better learning experiences for our students. But what I find more interesting today was because you said that we were going to look at how we can be creative as teachers from an evidence-based approach. So I look forward to today's session and maybe you can take us through this.
Okay, this was particularly challenging for me because there's so much written about creativity and so much of it, to me, from an evidence-based point of view, never made sense. People talked about, oh, you just got to click the creative switch and these kind of things. And there's a lot of thinking tools. And the kind of assumption is if you use these thinking tools, you're going to be creative. But if there's no good knowledge in people's heads and they get together and all they produce is not terribly good stuff, that it might look creative in the terms of lots of Post-its on the wall of different colors and everybody's clapping hands. But I'm not sure that's really proper creativity. Now, you may remember in the first episode, we talked about those two types of experts. This is just a refresher. And we're now very much in the area of adaptive expert. This is the person who's got the knowledge, got the skills, but can use it to solve challenging teaching, design situations. So over several years, me and you worked together on this and we did put a good shift in. So I thank you for that. And these are some of the things that we evolved from a lot of applied research. So let's take you through this. Firstly, there's three key things that are very evidence-based, but we must bear in mind and we must utilize. The most famous psychologist ever, in many people's opinion, is Edward de Bono. There's even a planet apparently named after him. And what he basically said is that, look, you can learn creativity, creative thinking, just like you learn mathematics or a sport. Yeah. And but you don't necessarily do it with traditional types of instructional strategies because the brain is not naturally creative. This is really interesting. People talk about the creative brain. It's a massive, massive information processing system. In certain ways, massively inferior to a computer. For example, we saw in the core principles that working memory has limited capacity. But if you go on Google now and type Jack Russell dog, I just made that up. You'll probably get millions of hits. So, if you compare the brain with the computer in certain ways, the computer is millions of times quicker. But what it can't do is break out of the algorithm. There was a conference recently where they had a robot, I think it was called Pepper at a conference. And this was a top of the range artificial intelligence robot. And they asked it specific questions and it gave very intelligent answers. But if you said to it, good morning, Pepper, how are you? It's blank. So the brain is not naturally creative, but if you break up the established neural pathways by creating some kind of conflict or provocation, or something challenges your existing beliefs and perceptions, that's how you become creative. And de Bono has become super famous by using these creative thinking techniques, but you've still got to work hard to develop the skills at doing them, and you've still got to have knowledge in those fields. Now, the second one, really important, because when people talk about creativity, they often think of some massive world-changing invention. And a chap called Fasco had a continuum from big to little C, creativity. So if you look at Fleming, the chap, and let's honor him for inventing penicillin, right? That is big creativity. However, there's many things that people do where they combine things that are a bit different and come up with something that is novel and useful. For example, bulletproof coffee. I use this, and it's simply putting MCT oil, which is kind of some virgin coconut. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and a lump of butter and putting it in a blender. And whipping it up and chucking a bit of cinnamon on top. Now, I mean, that doesn't change the world, but it is creative. Now, the last thing to bear in mind is we've got to have some kind of definition of creative teaching. Now, the most definitions accept that creativity involves combining things in some way, some novel way, to get useful results. The person that stuck a rubber at the end of a pencil, let's be honest about it, it doesn't seem that complicated, but it was creative.
Yeah, definitely.
And Edward de Bono actually says, in retrospect, all creativity seems so simple and obvious, but that's hindsight, isn't it?
Of course.
It's a bit like cat's eyes in the road. Percy Shaw, I think it was, driving home one night. The story has that he shined his light and it hit a cat's eyes, and he created some kind of conflict in his mind. And it took him a while, but suddenly he thought, hold on a minute, if we had something in the middle of the road that did this, and then that's how he made millions.
Yeah.
I think he still lived in his council flat. So even though he had all this money, he didn't seem to want to spend it on things. Okay, so my definition of creative teaching is very much within the little C. But as I'm going to mention in a minute, a little C in global terms can be a big C for the students you teach. So let's have a look at the definition. When a teacher combines some existing knowledge, this could be anything they know about teaching practices, anything they've learned in life, any story, any example, and they put it together, and it results in the student giving good attention. The student thinks, wow, yeah, that's really interesting. I want to listen to this. I want to think about this. And that could happen as much subconsciously and unconsciously as it does consciously. And now, the nice thing about creative teaching is that when you get good at it, you can actually plan it into the instruction. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. Or, and I'll show you an example of that as well, you can actually invent it in situ. Yeah. Adaptive expertise. So let's have a look at these two examples.
So to me, so before you do
sure.
that, to me, that's the ultimate level of creativity, that if you can do it in situ. Something is not right, something is not happening, let's apply the principles of learning and let's create a creative learning experience for the students. So that's, I think, the gold standard that every teacher should aim for.
Yeah, it is the gold standard of teaching. I referred to this in my most recent book. There's an old chapter on it. And it's called Creative Teaching Competence. So somebody who has creative teaching competence, yes, they are a routine expert in terms of knowledge and skills, but they have this creative adaptive expertise. So you're absolutely spot on. So I'll show you a couple of examples. There's many that we could have, and if you've got one that you want to share that comes to mind, we'll do that. So let's start with this. Now, if you look at that, it's a definition of Newton's law of motion that I picked up off the internet, and there's a reason I picked that up. And there's also a picture of David Beckham when he played for Manchester United. Now, there are people who support that for kind of football team. Kind of strange folk, apparently, if you're a Liverpool supporter.
I'll tell you why it would be interesting, because here's a little known and useless fact. I was born on the same day, same month, same year as David Beckham. So I always think, why did God make such a tremendous mistake?
Yeah, well, I've played football with you, Mark, and you were a decent player, but neither of us could quite bend it like Beckham, as the film goes. Okay, now let's put some context on this story. I was working once with a teacher who wanted to improve their teaching. And I observed the lesson where they taught this. And what the teacher did, put that definition up on the screen at the beginning of a lesson. It was an afternoon session. The students come in and now they're not settled. He doesn't seem to have great rapport with the students, and he reads this definition out with one of those markers, those highlighters. So I'm using technology, I'm pointing at each word. And if you actually read that through, if I read it through that, everybody would turn this video off. Pretty dull. And then he started writing the equation on the board, mass, force, acceleration, blah, blah, blah. And I could see within maybe 1 or 2 minutes, 90% of the students were totally disengaged. Anyway, after the lesson, we had a conversation, and he said, I could see the students are disengaged, but you can't teach this thing in an interesting way. So I said, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And because I've been working in this area, I suddenly thought, hold on a minute, mass, force, acceleration. And because I'm a football fan like you, I thought of David Beckham. So I thought, hold on a minute. if we take David Beckham taking a free kick and we play around with this in some creative way, we might get somewhere. So I said, look, I'll teach the lesson next week with another class. I went in. Now, I had an advantage over him. In Singapore, being a Westerner, I would have a bit of a novelty effect. You know, what's called in psychology a von Restorff effect. Oh, we've got an Angmo. Angmo, by the way, for people that are not familiar with Singaporeanism, is basically a Caucasian. Yep. So we've got a Caucasian and Angmo teaching us today. So I'm going to get better attention because I'm novel. I've got a football in my hand. I've just got, I've got no definitions. I've got nothing. I've just got a big picture of David Beckham. Now we're going back maybe over a decade when he played for Man United. Now, right away, that gets attention because the girls may look at that and say, he's a good looking guy. And there's a lot of women in the world who will probably agree with that. And the males would recognise it, and whether they like Man United or not, they would be interested and maybe start arguing amongst themselves like we might do. And now what I do is I have a strategy, and this is all planned, right? I go in and I say, look, you got a picture of David Beckham. I make a bit of a joke. I'll say to some of the girls, do you think I'm better looking than David Beckham? And Singaporean students, female students, what they are, very polite. They don't say what they might say in other places. They say to me, well, chair, teacher, David Beckham is a bit younger than you. So they're pretty polite. I make a flippant joke and say, well, you should be doing optometry because you've got bad eyes. Whether they got that joke, it doesn't matter. I've got attention.
Sure.
Now, I asked one of the male students, I'm not being sexist, I just picked a male student, I could have picked a female student, probably would today, to come out, and I said, look, I'm going to take this free kick. Now, all the class, I've got full attention, they're all looking at me, and I say to the class, now, let's suppose the opposition played a trick on me, you can see it on the screen, and they put down an heavier ball, a bit of a David Blaine type prank. Yeah. When I strike the ball, will it go faster or slower? And I said, right, think about that. Talk to the person next year, think pair share type method, and tell me. Anyway, they come up with it and they said, we think it will go slower. And I said, well, can you explain that? And they do. They say, well, if the ball gets heavier and heavier, when you strike it, eventually probably break your leg. So it's not going to go as fast. I said, okay, so let's spin it around. Let's suppose I'm David Beckham again. You know, I'm playing this. I'm using some presentation artistry here, presentation stuff. And I say, well, no one's played a trick on me, but I've been doing extra training because I'm David Beckham. I've got top trainers and I can now hit it 10% harder. Does it go faster or slower? And they say, well, it's likely to go faster. So when we do that, I say, well, can we explain that? And, and that is the relationship between mass and force and acceleration. So then when you then show them a definition, it makes sense. So this was creative teaching, little c, because nowhere will you see, somebody else might have come up with this as well somewhere in the world. It's possible, of course. No one has taught, from what I know, Newton's second law of motion using the analogy of David Beckham taking a free kick. So this is how you can, at the beginning of the lesson, get attention and teach a potentially abstract, difficult principle through a very practical, fun analogy. And I've used this type of thing with lots of classes, not always a David Beckham thing, because you must connect it to the learning outcome. But it was so easy to teach them that, and I haven't got a master's degree in physics. Yeah, but it's also important that you look at the situated context in what you talked about in the last episode. Yeah, so makes perfect sense. Yep. Yeah, in a society where there's no football, nobody knows David Beckham, it would have been silly. So I always change. I use the same syntax, the underpinning idea, and I contextualize it. Like, having worked in so many countries, I often use different analogies of making food. So if I'm in Vietnam, I'll have a Vietnamese dish. If I'm in Indonesia, I'll have an Indonesian dish. If I'm in Singapore, I'll have a Singapore dish. If I was in Germany, then, one of my favorite things is kind of German sausages with, what's it called? That kind of
wine
cabbage.
Sauce.
Yeah, whatever.
Sauerkraut.
That's the one. So I would use contextualized examples. Terribly important. Yeah. And again, that's creativity, and it's also good thinking.
Yeah. Okay.
So I planned all that before. So anybody watching that lesson could say, wow, that guy's really creative. Well, okay. But in a sense, once I've used the creative thinking approach, to a wide evidence-based approach, anybody can do that. So if you're a physics teacher now, you can just take that and do it. And if you do it well, they'll think, wow, that's very creative. So it's learnable. Okay?
Cool.
So now you look at that and you say, what the hell is that? Quite simply, I worked in Kolkata a number of times, and something happened to me one morning. I was going for a walk just to, to freshen up, get ready for the workshop. And a male about 13, 14 come up to me and he said, can I speak to you? And my natural expectation was, this is someone who's probably going to ask me for some money, and I'll probably give him some. But he said to me, I don't want anything, but can you get me a job? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, look, I'm a street kid. I mean, I'm not saying he said this in exactly the same word, but he was living on the streets. He was poor. And he said to me, I don't want to get involved in criminal activity. I want to get a job. I want to learn some skills, and I'm prepared to work any hours of the day. And this is about 7:30 in the morning. I'm like, I just wish I could have given him a job.
Right.
Just wish I could have given him a job. And that, it was just an experience. And I offered to give him $10 US and he wouldn't take it. That was really strange. I thought it was strange at the time. Anyway, I forgot about it. But a couple of years later, teaching a class of students on a program that they may not have really wanted to be on. We used to have programs called general elective modules, and this is where students would have to do something outside of their field. So they might be engineering students, but they could do music or art or something. And me and you run a program called Learning to Learn.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Anyway, and it was interesting. It was, I think it was Wednesday afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. The students come in, and I could see on their faces they didn't seem terribly interested. And I thought to myself, there's no point in me starting this lesson. Yeah. And what I did is I let them sit down, and they're kind of looking at me because I was quiet. And I said, guys, I want to say something to you. You guys are young, healthy, and Singaporean. You're so lucky. And they're kind of looking at me. And one student says, oh, what's so good about being Singaporean, lah? I mean, I'm using the local language. And I thought, right, okay. I said, well, hold on. You're living in Singapore. You've got probably one of the best education systems in the world. In fact, many people say it's the best. I actually also think it's very much in that genre. And you have full employment. It's safe to go out. You don't have to worry about where your next dinner's coming from. You've all got reasonable accommodation. Now, let me just tell you about my experience. And I tell him the Kolkata story, and they're kind of looking at me. And I said to him, right, now you tell me, what's the difference between you and that young person in Calcutta? Just talk to the person next to you. And they come up with, well, he doesn't have the opportunity. So I said, right, you have, so pay attention to me. I just did that. It was a strategy. Now, I didn't plan that to tell that story. And they all suddenly, it was a change. Now, I did the lesson. It seemed to go well, but this is the big point. When I took that class a week later, I walk in, I thought, oh, I'm going to have the same thing. And they kind of looked at me and smiled. And a couple of them said, Chair, you don't need to tell us the Kolkata story again. We get it. Okay. Now, having got their attention, because the program that we put together, How Do You Learn? Once I started that, and I said, look, you can learn anything you like, but we're going to go through certain principles of learning. So some chose to learn to play the guitar, some learned to do some weights, some actually wanted to do their studying better, strangely enough, but different things. And then we went through the learning process, a bit like some of the core principles, but contextualized to the students. And they really participated well and made an hell of a lot of effort. So that was just by one story invented, and then with an evidence-based approach around it, it works. So that's the two ways in which you can teach creatively. Now, when we did this research, you may remember, because we worked on this together and we applied it extensively, that we were looking at what these teachers do who seem to get student feedback where the student says, this teacher's interesting, this teacher's creative, it's fun in here, these kind of things. And what we did is, for a while, I had the opportunity to sit in and watch their lessons, and in some cases, video the lessons. And what we kind of found was, yeah, these teachers probably applied many of the core principles, even though they had no language to describe it. And that's why this is so important, the pedagogic literacy, for teachers to know that there are these core principles, so they can talk to other teachers and say, well, have you used an advanced organizer? Are you working with a psychological climate? Are you doing the right deliberate practice? So we were trying to create a language here. And what we found was that for these teachers who seemed to be able to create this motivation, they had some powerful stories. They were able to use humor. And this doesn't mean you've got to be a professional comedian. That the very fact that you encourage a bit of humour in the classroom, whether it's for a cartoon or you let the students tell the story, or you can see the funny side, you smile, those kind of things, it's massive to students. You don't need to be a professional comedian to do that. And we found, like I designed those activities for the David Beckham scenario, these teachers created interesting activities. I remember one teacher using a story in an activity. He was teaching optional pricing, and he told a story about his experience on honeymoon, how he could pay for a tour package, but then add something else. So he created an activity within the story, and he used some humor, like he was on a raft and there was a picture of him and his wife, and he said, oh, that's my much better looking half. Now, again, not terribly funny, but it would make the students laugh, because a lot of students don't experience teachers trying to bring some fun into the environment, presentation, psychological climate, which involves the presentational style to deliver it. So if you've got good presentation style, the ability to speak with an expressive tone, vary your gestures, and the smile is such a powerful tool. Yeah. It's probably one of the most powerful tools for building rapport. If you smile at a student, not a sickly, have a good day type smile. You know, sometimes you get that, you know, when you go in the shop, but a genuine smile, it's very rare for a student not to smile back at you. And that works so much unconsciously. So there's so much creativity around the way you can use your voice, your tone, your gestures, a bit of humor, good stories, powerful, engaging activities, and examples. Examples are so good to illustrate things. So to be able to come up with some wide range or very powerful examples to show something so students can clear it. If this is the shape of teaching, and the word shape fits nicely because we use it in everyday life. Like if I go down to the gym for 3 months and I walk around an educational institution where people know me, they might say to me, oh, Dan, you look in good shape. Equally, that if you don't do that, they might say, oh,
you're not being shape.
Yeah, that's right. So shape is a great metaphor. So creative teachers are, they can do the expertise stuff, but they've got that great shape about them in terms of the way they teach. So to say, I'm in great shape as a creative teacher, you are an adaptive expert. You can really do it, whether it's planning it or doing it in situ. So it's a heuristic. Shape is a heuristic, just like the core principles are a heuristic. So if you remember and understand the concepts of core principles, understand and remember the concepts of shape, and start to think about that and apply it in your practice, you're on your way. Obviously, you're going to have to do the deliberate practice, aren't you?
Of course.
And the last slide, this is again just an advanced, not an advanced organizer, but a kind of summary frame that provides us with an advanced organizer for the next session. But there you go, you can see it. You must have a pedagogic literacy. It's the term I used in my books. And all we're saying is pedagogic literacy is like being literate in a language or being literate at writing. Very poor teachers very often are pedagogically illiterate. They violate many, if not most, of the core principles, and the extent to which you can use those thoughtfully, then as we saw in the situated context, that's your key underpinning knowledge. Then you apply it, you become competent, and you could be a routine expert. But if you can put great shape on it, you're
That's
a creative
right.
teacher.
Adaptive expertise. That's right.
Hope that has given us
Yeah.
a good key concept view of creativity, creative teaching, what it looks like and feels like.
Yeah. So thanks, Dennis. Thanks for sharing that. I enjoyed that session, especially reminders about how important stories, having a good sense of humor, and really thinking of the type of activities based on good core principles of learning, and having a good dynamic presentation style, and using good examples to helm the learning for students. And that's good. So I enjoyed today's episode tremendously. More importantly, actually, I have another question to ask you. What will we be covering in episode 4? Because in light of today's COVID situation, I was just wondering if we can use some of these ideas and principles of both evidence-based creative teaching and the core principles of learning. Can they be applied in a technological environment such as e-learning?
Absolutely, Mark. In fact, it's even more imperative, because when you don't have that face-to-face situation, you can't kind of repair things that easily. So it applies totally. And what's interesting is, once you understand that, using the technology for designing and facilitating online learning is not that difficult. And you'll find that you'll get great results from it. And in the next session, we will show exactly how to do that.
Okay, cool. So I look forward to that. Now, if you were inspired by today's episode, or if you want to find out more, please do write to Dennis, or you can email him at dennis.sale@gmail.com. Or if you have an idea of wanting to really explore shape or core principles or creative teaching a little bit more, and how we can work with your colleagues in their terms of their professional development, please do drop Dennis an email. Or you can check out his website at www.dennissale.com. So thanks again, Dennis, for today's
episode.
And then we will look at episode 4, where we look at how we can apply this in a technological environment. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.